It began without an announcement, without a single declaration of intent or a carefully orchestrated speech to silence the doubters. The comeback was quiet, so quiet that those who had written her off didn't even notice at first. They thought she had disappeared, folded under the weight of their ridicule, their whispers, their endless parade of reasons why she would never make it. She let them think it. She let them laugh. She let them turn their backs because in their dismissal, they gave her the one thing she needed most: space. She had once been full of words. Defenses, explanations, justifications, every attempt to convince people that she was not what they said she was. But words were like sand slipping through fingers. No matter how many she gathered, they never held long enough to build anything solid. When the last of her explanations dissolved into silence, she discovered something far more powerful than their approval. She discovered herself. The early days of her rebuilding were invisible. While others flaunted loud victories, she worked in shadows. The hours were grueling, the progress slow, and there were nights when exhaustion pressed so heavily on her chest that it felt like failure was the only certainty. Still, she rose, quietly, consistently, determined that this time the work would speak where her words never had. There was no audience to cheer her on, no applause echoing through the long hours. There was only discipline, monotonous, unglamorous discipline. Those who once mocked her moved on to easier targets. They assumed she had broken permanently, that she had abandoned her dreams to join the countless others who tried and failed. That was their mistake. She hadn't quit. She had only gone silent, and silence, she was learning, was not weakness. It was strategy. Her first signs of progress were almost imperceptible. A small accomplishment here, a breakthrough there, things too small for anyone to notice but her. Yet each one was a stone laid on the foundation of something greater. She began to understand the rhythm of growth, the way persistence compounded into momentum. The very people who had laughed at her absence didn't realize that absence was, in fact, her presence, focused, sharpened, untouchable. And then came the day when the silence broke, not with words but with results. The project she had been laboring over in obscurity emerged whole, undeniable, and brilliant. The success was not something that could be argued with, not something that could be dismissed as luck or coincidence. It was carved from effort, burnished by resilience, undeniable in its impact. The whispers that once mocked her transformed into new ones. How had she done it? Where had she come from? Why hadn't they seen it coming? They searched for explanations, for excuses to soften the sting of being wrong about her. But she offered them nothing. She smiled politely, gave no speeches, and moved forward with the quiet grace of someone who no longer needed validation. It wasn't revenge, though some might have thought so. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong for the sake of it. It was about proving herself right, about holding onto the ember of belief that had survived in her when everything else had tried to extinguish it. She realized, in the end, that silence had been her greatest weapon, not because it hid her, but because it allowed her to build without interruption. When people saw her now, they no longer saw the woman they had dismissed. They saw the result of every night she worked unseen, every sacrifice no one had noticed, every moment of doubt she had conquered alone. She had become a reminder that success does not need an announcement, that the loudest proof is often the quietest. And so, she carried on, not with proclamations or arguments, but with the steady weight of her accomplishments behind her. She no longer sought to defend herself with words. She let her life speak, and in its unshakable voice, the world finally listened. She remembered the first time they laughed at her. It was not cruel laughter at first, not sharp enough to cut, but mocking all the same. A quiet scoff, a raised eyebrow, a comment disguised as concern. Maybe this just isn't for you. Those words had stayed with her, heavier than she admitted at the time. They became a chorus that followed her everywhere, growing louder with each stumble, each setback. The truth was, there had been a period when she almost believed them. Almost. There had been nights when she sat at her desk, staring at unfinished work, her hands motionless, her heart heavy with the weight of failure. She had felt the temptation to give in, to let their voices become her truth, to stop trying. But something deeper than pride, deeper even than ambition, would not let her. It was a quiet thing, this force inside her, not the fire of defiance, but the steady ember of persistence. Even when her confidence broke, that ember refused to go out. She learned the power of vanishing, not as surrender, but as protection. She withdrew from the noise, from the expectations, from the toxic chorus of opinions. Her absence gave her peace, and peace gave her clarity. She realized that her comeback didn't need to be staged for an audience. It needed to be built for herself. And so she worked. Work became ritual. Every morning she rose before dawn, when the world was still, when no one could interrupt her focus. The hours stretched long, the tasks relentless, but she learned to embrace them. She stopped measuring progress by recognition and instead by small victories, the kind of victories no one else would ever see. The page filled with words, the blueprint refined, the mistakes corrected, the idea sharpened. Each step forward felt insignificant in isolation, but together they formed a path no one else could deny. There were setbacks, of course there were. Days when everything collapsed, when months of effort unraveled in an instant, when exhaustion left her trembling. She wept in private, but she rose again. Because giving up would have been louder than failure. Silence, she decided, was not quitting. Silence was perseverance. And then, as seasons passed, her silence bore fruit. The project was complete, the dream no longer abstract but real. Her return to the world was not dramatic. It did not need to be. It was a quiet unveiling, as natural as a seed breaking the surface of the earth after a long winter underground. And when they saw what she had built, the ones who doubted her had no choice but to fall silent themselves. They stared at her with widened eyes, masks of disbelief barely covering their regret. The same people who once dismissed her now scrambled to align themselves with her success. Some offered hollow congratulations, others searched for ways to claim they had always believed in her. She accepted it all with calm detachment, because she no longer needed their validation. She had built something stronger than approval. She had built proof. What she had created was more than success. It was a monument to endurance. Every piece of it was layered with nights of sacrifice. Every detail carried the weight of the battles she had fought in silence. No critic could erase it. No whisper could undo it. It stood taller than their judgments, brighter than their doubt. She realized then that she no longer carried resentment. She didn't need it. Their doubt had been her catalyst, their dismissal her fuel. What once stung now seemed almost laughable. They had tried to bury her, but they had only given her soil to grow. Her life now moved differently, not with the frantic urgency of proving herself, but with the steady confidence of someone who already had. She didn't argue anymore. She didn't explain herself. She didn't waste breath trying to convince anyone of her worth. She let her work speak, and its voice was louder than any words she could have uttered. And in that silence, she found her triumph. There was a winter evening she never forgot, the one that nearly broke her. The sky outside was heavy with snow, pressing silence against the windows, but inside her small apartment, the air was filled with the weight of failure. She had tried, over and over, pouring hours into her work only for it to collapse under its own fragility. Papers covered the desk, some crumpled, others half-finished, all of them screaming the same accusation: not enough. Her phone buzzed with messages from acquaintances who had once been supportive, but now only offered veiled pity. Someone had sent a photo of a gathering she hadn't been invited to, people she used to sit with, people who now laughed freely without her. She could almost hear their words. She tried, bless her heart, but she just wasn't cut out for it. The shame was suffocating, and for the first time, she let herself wonder if they were right. That night she turned off the phone, closed the blinds, and sat in the dark with her doubts. But instead of letting them devour her, she listened. Beneath the fear, beneath the humiliation, there was something else. A whisper, not loud, not dramatic, but stubborn. Not yet. Don't stop yet. The whisper carried her through the night, and when morning came, she began again. not with grand plans or lofty declarations, but with one small task. Then another. Then another. She learned to live in the discipline of small steps, trusting that they would add up to something greater. The seasons turned. Spring bled into summer, summer into autumn, and with each passing day her silence deepened, but so did her strength. While others lived loudly, broadcasting their every move, she worked quietly, stacking bricks no one else could see. She became invisible in their world, and strangely, she liked it that way. They forgot her, dismissed her as gone, but she was not gone. She was building. The turning point was almost unremarkable. A small success, barely noticeable to anyone else, signaled that her efforts were no longer just survival, but momentum. She didn't celebrate. She didn't tell anyone. She simply kept going. She began to feel something she hadn't felt in years: certainty. And then, the silence broke, not with a roar, but with the weight of undeniable success. It was as though a curtain had been lifted, and suddenly there she was, standing in the light with the very thing they had said she could never achieve. The world that had forgotten her now could not stop looking. Her work spread farther than she ever imagined, reaching people she would never meet, touching lives in ways she hadn't expected. The doubters resurfaced, their voices softer now, careful, cautious. Some tried to rewrite the past. "We always knew you'd do it." Others remained speechless, unable to reconcile the person they once dismissed with the success before them. But she had no need to respond. Their words no longer mattered, not in victory and not in doubt. Her silence was not emptiness, it was presence. It was the sound of focus, of resilience, of patience. And in the end, that silence became her loudest statement, proof that she had endured, that she had risen, that she had turned every whispered doubt into fuel for her return. She didn't need applause. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need to explain herself. She had built her life in such a way that it spoke for her, and its voice carried farther than she ever could. And so she moved forward, quietly still, but no longer overlooked. She had discovered the secret that few understood. True success doesn't shout. It doesn't beg to be seen. It waits, it builds, it grows, until the day it becomes impossible to ignore.